So imagine a leader handpicked by God, right? Like someone gifted with literal supernatural strength. He's
Yeah.
meant to be the absolute savior of his nation. But then you imagine that same leader spending his entire career just driven by impulsive lust, unchecked anger, and this startling level of entitlement.
Totally unhinged.
Right. I mean, he treats his divine calling like a cheap parlor trick. He routinely visits prostitutes in enemy territory. He breaks like every single vow he ever made.
Yeah, it's wild.
And in the end, his final prayer isn't even for the liberation of his people. It's just this really petty request for personal revenge. And, we aren't talking about a modern day rock star here or
Yeah.
some disgraced politician burning up the tabloids.
No, we're not.
We are talking about Samson, one of the most revered, legendary heroes in ancient biblical history. And the crazy part is, he is just the tip of the iceberg.
It completely shatters the illusion, doesn't it? I mean, we have this incredibly deep-seated expectation that spiritual or historical leaders need to be carved out of flawless marble.
Right. We want the knight on the white horse.
Exactly, the guy with absolutely zero baggage. But when you examine the raw, unfiltered accounts of history, that marble just shatters instantly. You are left staring at a leadership landscape that is messy, deeply compromised, and frankly, completely baffling.
Which is exactly what we are plunging into today.
Let's dive
Welcome
in.
to the deep dive. We are skipping the usual warm-up because, well, we are tackling one of the most chaotic, violent, and morally bankrupt eras in human history.
The era of the biblical judges.
Exactly. And for you listening, we're using some brilliant foundational material for this. It's an essay and a series of really detailed infographic charts called God Uses Imperfect Leaders, The Judges as a Window into Divine Grace by Chris R. Velasquez.
It's a fantastic resource.
It really is. But our mission today goes way beyond just a history lesson. We want to understand the actual mechanics of moral collapse. Like
Right.
what actually happens to the psychology of a society when it completely fragments? How does an entire culture try to survive on what can only be described as spiritual improvisation?
That's a great term for it.
Yeah. And most importantly, how does divine grace actually operate when the only tools available are profoundly broken, deeply flawed human beings?
Well, it is a masterclass in the tension between human inadequacy and divine sovereignty. I mean, to really grasp what is happening here, we have to entirely abandon our modern, sanitized view of biblical heroes.
Right, wash away the flannel graph Sunday school version.
Exactly. The era of the judges is not a collection of morality tales. It is a brutal, unvarnished look at what happens when a society possesses tremendous blessings, but absolutely zero internal moral compass.
And that is why we have you here. You just have this way of looking at these ancient, dense texts and pulling out the psychological and sociological patterns that apply exactly to how we live today.
Well, try.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to set the stage first. So Joshua is dead. The great generation that conquered the promised land is gone. What is the actual state of the nation of Israel as we enter this era?
So physically, they are in the promised land, they've arrived, but the geographical reality does not match their spiritual reality. They live in the land, sure, but they haven't fully possessed it in obedient faith.
What does that mean practically?
Well, to understand the chaos, you have to understand the environment. They didn't completely drive out the Canaanite inhabitants like they were commanded to do. Instead, they just sort of settled down next to them.
Which sounds, on the surface like a peaceful compromise. Like, why fight when you can just be neighbors, right?
Right, except it wasn't just about sharing property lines. You have to remember that the Israelites were fundamentally a nomadic, desert-wandering people.
Yeah, they'd been in tents for 40 years.
Exactly. And they had just arrived in this lush agricultural region. The Canaanites were the agricultural experts of the ancient Near East.
Oh, I see.
And their entire farming system was inextricably tied to their religion, specifically the worship of Baal, the storm and fertility god.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The Canaanites believed that to get rain and good crops, you had to perform specific, often horrific rituals to appease Baal.
So for the Israelites, this wasn't just a sudden malicious rejection of God. It was like a slow, pragmatic compromise.
Exactly.
They wanted the agricultural technology, and in the ancient world, you couldn't separate the farming techniques from the farming gods.
Precisely. It was assimilation by convenience. I mean, they wanted the benefits of the land without the demands of the covenant they made with Yahweh.
Right.
And this leads to the core diagnostic phrase that just echoes like a funeral dirge throughout the entire book of Judges. The text repeats this devastating summary. It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. I mean, if you put that on a bumper sticker today, people would buy it immediately.
Oh, totally.
It sounds like the ultimate slogan for radical individualism, right? Speak your truth, live your authentic life, do whatever works for you.
Yeah. But in the context of this history, it is a profound terminal diagnosis.
Wow.
It isn't just a political commentary noting the absence of a centralized monarch or a government. It is the ultimate theological failure. Think of it as the fall socialized.
To fall socialized. Hold on, that's a massive concept. When we talk about the fall, we're usually talking about the Garden of Eden, right?
Right.
Adam and Eve choosing their own wisdom over God's command. So you're saying that isolated individual rebellion has now become the systemic operating system for an entire nation.
Exactly. Autonomous moral judgment has entirely replaced submission to a higher authority. Every single household, every single tribe is acting as its own sovereign state.
Just deciding what is good and evil based entirely on pragmatism and whatever they desire.
Yeah. They possess the land, but without any holiness. They have the memory of their deliverance from Egypt, but it has no bearing on their daily obedience. It's this terrifying combination of possessing immense privilege while abandoning all responsibility.
It's like inheriting a massive fortune from your grandparents, but completely abandoning the family business and the values that built the wealth in the first place. You're just burning through the inheritance.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
And we see exactly where that leads. This society doesn't just stagnate. It falls into a very specific, deeply destructive psychological and sociological loop. The source text outlines this as a 7-step cycle of chaos.
Yes, and understanding the mechanics of this cycle is absolutely vital for the listener. It isn't just a neat literary device. It is a profound observation of human nature that plays out over centuries.
So walk us through the steps.
So the cycle begins with apostasy. Israel abandons their covenant to serve local deities.
Right.
And this isn't just a casual shift in weekend worship,
Yeah.
It fundamentally breaks their societal structure. They embrace the exploitation and immorality inherent in Canaanite religion.
Which naturally triggers the consequence. God allows their enemies to overpower them. Oppression sets in. This is fascinating to me because it implies that their moral compromise actually weakened their national security. By fragmenting internally and adopting the corrupt practices of their neighbors, they just became easy prey.
It is a direct cause and effect. The oppression serves as severe divine discipline. They are stripped of their comfort, their wealth, and their autonomy.
And what happens when humans hit absolute rock bottom? They cry out in distress. This is the third phase of the cycle.
But notice, it is a cry of agony, not necessarily a cry of genuine repentance.
Oh, that's a huge distinction.
Yeah, they are sorry they're suffering. They aren't necessarily sorry they sinned.
There is a massive difference between crying out because you're in pain and crying out because you actually want to change.
Right.
Yet, despite the questionable motives of their distress, God responds. He raises up a deliverer, a judge, to break the oppression. Deliverance comes. The enemy is routed.
Which brings the land back to a state of rest and peace. But here is the tragic psychological mechanism at play. The peace only lasts for the lifetime of that specific judge. Once the immediate crisis is over, the urgency for God vanishes. Comfort returns, and with comfort comes amnesia.
So the next generation grows up in peace, forgets the horror of the oppression, forgets the miracle of the deliverance, and they just slide right back into apostasy.
And the cycle restarts. But the text implies it's not a flat circle, it's a downward spiral.
Like a drain.
Exactly. Each time they loop through this, the baseline of morality drops even lower. The corruption gets deeper and deeper.
It is a compounding spiritual debt.
Yes. This cycle is revelation, not just a historical recounting. It proves a few unshakable realities about the human condition. First, covenant rebellion inevitably produces bondage.
When you crown yourself king and do what is right in your own eyes, you don't actually find freedom. You find enslavement to your own appetite.
And the surrounding culture. Second, it proves that deep human change is almost impossible without intense crisis. We rarely change when things are comfortable.
Make that the truth.
And third, it proves that God's mercy is wildly persistent. He consistently interrupts their self-destruction.
I look at this cycle, and it is impossible not to see modern parallels. Think about a toxic relationship dynamic or, a massive corporate failure or even a personal addiction loop.
Oh, absolutely.
You compromise your values, you hit rock bottom, the consequences are unbearable. You cry out for help, you go to rehab, you get a bailout, someone rescues you, things get peaceful.
Right.
And the second you feel secure again, you think, I can handle it this time, and you slide right back into the exact same destructive behavior.
The mechanism is identical. It is the exact same psychological architecture, just played out on a geopolitical scale across hundreds of years.
But this forces me to ask a massive question. If God is all-powerful, and he clearly sees this toxic loop repeating generation after generation, why participate in it?
That's the million-dollar question.
Why doesn't God just shatter the cycle permanently? Why play into this endless rhythm of rescue and relapse? It seems incredibly inefficient, like almost enabling.
It is the most logical question to ask when you read this history. I mean, why engage with a system you know is going to fail again in 40 years?
Exactly.
But if we look at the broader theological purpose, the source material points out that the cycle itself is the point.
Wait, really? The failure is the point.
Yes, the repetitive failure is designed to demonstrate something that one single permanent rescue could never prove. It proves that human leadership and human willpower are utterly insufficient to solve the human condition.
So letting them fail over and over is basically like an extended diagnostic test.
Yeah. Think about what Israel wanted. Every time they cried out, they thought their problem was political or military.
We just need someone to get rid of the Moabites.
Right. We just need someone to smash the Midianite chariots. They thought their crisis was purely external. But by providing the military rescue over and over and watching the society rot from the inside out anyway, God is exposing the root disease.
The external rescue doesn't fix the internal rot.
Exactly. The cycle proves that their real crisis is a complete internal covenant collapse. They don't just need a new general, They need a new heart.
Wow.
They need an inner renewal that no human judge can provide.
Mm-hmm.
And furthermore, this cycle is a profound display of divine patience. Sending oppression shows he will not leave rebellion unchecked. He cares too much about their ultimate trajectory to let them peacefully assimilate into oblivion.
But sending a deliverer shows he refuses to abandon his promise to them.
Yes.
Okay, so the system is flawed, the cycle is toxic, and the people are rebellious. But here is where the history gets genuinely shocking. When God decides to send a deliverer to interrupt this cycle, he doesn't send a polished, morally pristine saint.
Not at all.
The people stepping into the role of the rescuer are just as compromised as the society they were trying to save.
This is where we have to strip away all of our preconceived notions about biblical heroes. The narrative absolutely refuses to offer us a simplistic, comforting equation where good character equals divine calling. The judges were not chosen because they were moral exemplars.
So let's dive into this roster of flawed deliverers, because when you look at the specifics, it is wild. Let's start with Ehud.
On Ehud.
The text points out that he was left-handed and politically unexpected, but there is so much more going on beneath the surface of that story.
To understand Ehud, you have to understand the oppression. Israel is being subjugated by Eglon, the king of Moab.
Okay.
And the text notes that Eglon was a very fat man, which in the ancient Near East was a vivid literary way of showing that he was literally fattening himself on the stolen wealth and crops of Israel.
So Israel is starving, and Eglon is gorging himself on their labor.
Exactly. And Ehud is chosen to deliver the tribute, basically the mafia tax to Eglon.
Right.
And the detail about Ehud being left-handed is crucial here. It's not just a random trivia fact. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, which ironically translates to son of the right hand. In ancient military culture, left-handedness was seen as an anomaly, sometimes even a defect, and military checkpoints were entirely designed around right-handed men. Weapons were checked on the left thigh.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going.
Right. So Ehud straps an 18-inch double-edged sword to his right thigh, completely bypassing the king's security.
He uses what his culture might consider a quirk or a disadvantage to get entirely alone with the king in his private chamber, and then he just assassinates him.
It's a brutal, visceral scene.
Yeah, the doors are locked, the servants think the king is just using the restroom, and Ehud casually escapes. It's like an ancient political thriller.
And it highlights God utilizing the unconventional and the overlooked. I mean, Ehud wasn't a great military general. He was a lone operative who used a perceived physical abnormality to subvert an entire regime.
Which brings us to Deborah, and if we are talking about subverting expectations, she shatters them. She is a prophetess and a judge, literally rendering decisions under a palm tree.
You have to picture the cultural landscape here. It is a time of profound spiritual and societal disorder. The Canaanite general, Sisera, is terrorizing the region with 900 iron chariots.
Which is massive for that time, right?
Iron chariots in this era were the equivalent of modern tanks going up against disorganized infantry. The Israelites were absolutely paralyzed with fear, just hiding in the hills. The highways were abandoned. Society had completely broken down.
And the traditional male leadership has completely abdicated their responsibility.
Entirely. When Deborah summons Barak, the Israelite military commander, and gives him the divine order to go to battle, his response is essentially, "I will only go if you hold my hand."
Wow.
He refuses to act without her presence. The fact that God raised up a woman to lead the nation spiritually and ultimately militarily was a stark indictment of the cowardice of the men of that generation.
Right.
And even in the battle itself, God uses a flash flood at the Kishon River to bog down the iron chariots in the mud, rendering the supreme technological advantage of the Canaanites totally useless.
And the ultimate disgrace for Sisera, the great Canaanite general, is that he escapes the battle on foot, only to be assassinated in a tent by another woman, Jael, using a tent peg.
Yeah.
The entire narrative completely mocks the patriarchal militaristic pride of the ancient world.
It is a total inversion of human power structures. God bypasses the traditional avenues of strength and uses a prophetess and a nomadic tent-dwelling woman to dismantle an empire's war machine.
Okay, but then we get to Gideon, and Gideon is fascinating to me because I think he is widely remembered as this great, faithful warrior. But when you look at the text, his psychology is just a mess.
Oh, the contrast between Gideon's reputation and his reality is jarring. When we first meet him, the Midianites are treating Israel like a pantry.
What do you mean?
They aren't even occupying the land. They just wait until harvest time, sweep in like locusts, steal all the food, and leave the Israelites to starve.
That's awful.
And where do we find this future hero?
Yeah.
He is hiding in a wine press, trying to thresh wheat in secret so the Midianites don't see him. It's a picture of total paranoid survivalism.
And an angel appears to him and calls him a mighty man of valor, which feels incredibly sarcastic given the circumstances.
God is calling out what he will accomplish through Gideon, not what Gideon currently is. Because Gideon is paralyzed by insecurity. He demands sign after sign.
Like the fleece?
Yes, the famous story of Gideon putting the fleece out, asking God to make it wet while the ground is dry, and then reversing it the next night.
Which people use as a model for decision-making today.
And they shouldn't. That isn't a model for how to make spiritual decisions. That is a portrait of a man who is terrified and treating God like a magic 8-ball because he doesn't want to take the risk of obedience.
Yet God accommodates that fear. He humors the fleece requests. He whittles Gideon's army down from 32,000 men to just 300, specifically so Israel can't brag that they won by their own strength.
Right.
And they win the battle using torches and trumpets. It's an incredible victory. But there is a dark epilogue to Gideon that most people skip over.
And this is where the danger of flawed leaders really rears its head. After the victory, the people try to make Gideon their king. He says the right theological words. He says, "No, the Lord will rule over you."
Sounds good so far.
But then he immediately asks for all the gold jewelry plundered from the battle. He takes the gold, melts it down, and creates an ephod, a priestly garment, and puts it in his hometown.
He basically creates a rogue, unauthorized religious shrine.
He sets up a rival cult. He begins acting exactly like a Canaanite king. He takes many wives, has 70 sons, and completely destabilizes the religious fidelity of the nation.
Wow.
He won the external military battle, but he completely lost the internal spiritual war. He led the entire nation right back into idolatry.
It is so messy, and honestly, it gets even darker with the next major judge, Jephthah. Talk about a tragic origin story.
Jephthah's life is a masterclass in the consequences of theological ignorance. He was the son of a prostitute, completely marginalized and driven out of his home by his half-brothers. He goes out into the Badlands and becomes the leader of a gang of outlaws. He is essentially an ancient mafia boss.
Right.
And when the Ammonites threaten to destroy the region of Gilead, the very elders who exiled Jephthah come crawling back to him, begging him to be their commander.
Which sets up this incredibly transactional view of the world. Jephthah only knows how to operate through leverage and negotiation.
Exactly.
And the tragedy is, he applies that exact same mafia boss mentality to his relationship with God.
Yes. Before he goes to battle, he makes a rash, horrifying vow. He tells God, "If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph, I will sacrifice as a burnt offering.
Oh, man. He is treating the God of the universe like a local Canaanite deity who needs to be bribed with human sacrifice.
It is a breathtaking display of how deeply the Canaanite religion had infected the Israelite mindset. God didn't need or want that vow. The Spirit had already empowered Jephthah for the battle. But Jephthah didn't know the character of the God he was serving. He wins the battle, returns home, and his only child, his daughter, comes out to greet him with a tambourine.
It is one of the most gut-wrenching scenes in history.
It really is.
His theological ignorance literally costs him his lineage and his daughter's life. He was a deliverer for the nation, but a complete catastrophe for his own family.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the final, most famous, and most contradictory judge of all.
Samson.
Samson. The guy is a walking paradox. Set apart from birth with a Nazirite vow, no alcohol, no cutting his hair, no touching dead bodies, he is given this raw, terrifying, supernatural strength.
Yeah.
But his internal character is the exact opposite of his physical strength. He's entirely driven by his libido, his impulses, and his ego.
By the time we get to Samson, the Israelite society has degraded so much that they aren't even crying out to God for deliverance anymore.
Really, they just gave up. They have fully assimilated with the Philistines. They are comfortable in their subjugation. So God has to raise up Samson, it's essentially as a one-man disruption mechanism. Samson doesn't lead an army. He doesn't judge disputes. He just wreaks havoc.
And he breaks every single rule of his vow along the way. He touches the dead lion carcass. He attends drinking feasts. He constantly seeks out Philistine women, including prostitutes. He treats his calling like a game.
He possesses a staggering level of entitlement. I mean, he assumes that God's power is an inherent biological trait that belongs to him, rather than a covenantal grace that requires obedience.
Right.
He flirts with disaster constantly, playing games with Delilah, revealing the secret of his vow. And the most terrifying verse in his story is when his hair is finally cut.
Yeah.
The Philistines are upon him. He wakes up and says, I will go out as before and shake myself free. But the text says he did not know that the Lord had left him.
Wow. He was so numb to his own compromise that he didn't even notice when the presence of God departed. He is blinded, enslaved, grinding grain in a Philistine prison. And even in his final act, when he pushes the pillars apart and brings the temple of Dagon down on the Philistine lords, his prayer isn't, Lord, liberate my people. His prayer is, Lord, give me strength just this once so I can get revenge for my 2 eyes.
It is a petty, vindictive prayer.
Yeah.
Yet God answers it using Samson's selfish desire for revenge to strike a massive blow against the Philistine power structure.
Here is where it gets really complicated for me, and I know this has to bother other people too.
Sure.
I look at Samson, and the analogy that instantly comes to mind is the tragic celebrity. We have seen this play out a million times in our culture. Someone is born with raw, undeniable talent, like a musician, an athlete, a visionary CEO.
Right.
They have the charisma to captivate the world, but they have absolutely zero impulse control or character to sustain it. They burn incredibly bright, they leave a trail of collateral damage, and they crash hard.
Yep.
Doesn't putting a spotlight on individuals like Samson risk sending a highly dangerous message? Doesn't it tell people that your character doesn't actually matter, as long as you get the job done and produce results?
That is the ultimate danger of a superficial reading of history. If we look at these figures and try to extract moral principles from their behavior, we will end up with a wildly distorted worldview.
Okay.
The key concept here, based on the sources, is distinguishing between fruitfulness and maturity.
Fruitfulness and maturity.
God's work in the world does not depend on human perfection. He can and does use deeply flawed instruments to accomplish his purposes. However, and this is a massive caveat, using flawed leaders is never, ever an endorsement of their flaws.
Use does not equal endorsement.
Exactly. Look at how the narrative is constructed. Samson's sensuality, Jephthah's rash and horrific vow, Gideon's slide into idolatry, Ehud's brutality. None of this is swept under the rug.
Right. The historical text doesn't hire a PR firm to sanitize their legacies.
Not at all. Their flaws are glaringly exposed, and the devastating consequences of their sins are recorded in agonizing detail. The deepest reading of this era reveals that God is the only true deliverer.
The human judges are merely instruments, and often quite blunt, self-destructive instruments at that. So, by using the most unlikely, broken people, it actually prevents the audience from worshiping the leader. If God used a perfect, flawless knight in shining armor, we would praise the knight.
Right.
But by using a cowardly farmer hiding in a wine press or a vengeful, impulsive brute like Samson, It becomes unmistakably clear that the salvation belongs entirely to the Lord.
Precisely. His grace is the only thing keeping the redemptive storyline moving forward. But you've hit on the core tension of this entire deep dive. We are walking a razor-thin theological tightrope here.
The tension between grace and approval. How does an all-holy God use deeply unholy people without compromising his own standards?
It requires us to deeply understand divine sovereignty over human inadequacy. God's sovereign purposes are not held hostage by human excellence.
Right.
I mean, if God could only work through perfectly sanctified, entirely pure individuals, history would have ended in the Garden of Eden.
The hiring pool would be zero.
Exactly. But the text is also fiercely clear that God commands holiness and integrity. Scripture never treats sin casually. The fallout from the judge's compromises destroys families and destabilizes the nation.
So how do we reconcile this?
We have to understand that God's work through a person is a manifestation of his grace toward the nation, not a tribute to the individual's capacity. And the vital pastoral point we must grasp is this: grace does not equal moral approval.
External success does not erase inner disorder. Just because a leader builds a massive organization, wins a huge election, or in Samson's case, tears a lion apart with his bare hands, it doesn't mean their heart is aligned with God.
And that introduces a crucial, often misunderstood theological concept. Empowerment for a task is not the same thing as sanctification.
Explain the difference between those two things for me.
Empowerment is a temporary equipping by the Spirit to accomplish a specific objective. Samson was empowered to lift the gates of a city. Jephthah was empowered to defeat an army. But sanctification is the slow, deep, internal transformation of a person's character to reflect the nature of God. You can be highly empowered for a moment while remaining completely unsanctified in your character.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here because this feels incredibly dangerous.
Go for it.
If a leader's inner disorder isn't erased by their external success, if God will still use them to accomplish great things while their private life is a toxic mess, how do we prevent this from becoming a blank check for terrible behavior?
That's the real fear.
If I'm a gifted leader, couldn't I just say, well, look at Samson. God is using me, so my private sins don't really matter. How do you accept this radical grace without just enabling bad behavior and abuse?
It is a terrifying tightrope. And historically, institutions and individuals fall off it all the time. The most helpful way to understand this is to pull this ancient history forward and look at how the New Testament handles this exact same tension.
Oh, interesting. So this isn't just an Old Testament anomaly where God behaved differently.
Not at all. How does this show up in the New Testament? Let's look at the Apostle Peter.
Right.
We're talking about the man who walked on water, who preached at Pentecost, who was undeniably empowered by the Holy Spirit and commissioned by Jesus himself to build the early church.
He's the guy.
Yet, years later in the book of Galatians, we see Peter operating out of deep insecurity and fear of human opinion. He hypocritically stops eating with Gentile believers because he is afraid of a specific faction of Jewish believers.
Oh, wow.
The Apostle Paul has to publicly confront and rebuke him to his face. Peter's empowerment at Pentecost did not mean his sanctification was instantly complete. He still had severe flaws that required confrontation.
He had the calling, but his character was still under construction.
Exactly. Or look at an entire community like the early church in Corinth. If you read Paul's letters to the Corinthians, they're described as arguably the most charismatically gifted church in the ancient world.
Okay.
They had prophecy, they had miracles, they were dynamic and active.
They were checking all the boxes for external success.
Yet Paul's letters to them are absolutely scathing. Why? Because despite their immense gifting, they are carnally divided, they are suing each other in secular courts.
Wow.
They are getting drunk at communion, and they are tolerating levels of sexual immorality that even the pagan culture around them found shocking.
So profound spiritual gifting and profound moral bankruptcy were existing in the exact same room.
Exactly. The lesson from the sources is clear. We must never confuse charisma with Christlikeness. A leader may be incredibly articulate, possess immense strategic vision, gather thousands of followers, and accomplish massive kingdom-building tasks,
Right.
while simultaneously being profoundly, dangerously disordered in their private character. God's empowering presence to get a job done is not a seal of approval on the person's hidden sins.
And as we see in the tragic ends of almost all the judges, compromise always eventually collects its toll. You can be used by God and still end up breaking God's heart and breaking your own life in the process. Man, that is a sobering reality check. It completely dismantles the idea that success is a sign of divine favor on your lifestyle.
Yeah, it really does.
Okay, we have dissected these wild individuals and the really intense theological tension of their flaws. But to really understand why this chaotic, violent period matters for someone trying to navigate life today, we need to pan the camera way, way back.
Context is everything.
Right, we need to zoom out and look at where the book of Judges sits in the grand, sweeping narrative of human history.
Because if you read Judges in isolation, it just reads like a depressing anthology of failure.
Yeah, it's pretty bleak.
But when you map it onto the timeline of redemptive history, its purpose becomes incredibly clear.
Let's trace that timeline briefly for the listener to orient ourselves. The biblical narrative starts in eternity, where God purposes to display his glory.
Right.
Then we move to creation, which is ordered, intentional, and good. But quickly, we hit the fall.
The entrance of sin, which distorts every facet of the human experience, our leadership structures, our communities, our internal desires. And as we discussed at the beginning, the era of the Judges is the manifestation of the fall socialized. It is what happens when that original rebellion scales up to an entire civilization.
Following the fall, we have the covenant era. God pledging himself to a specific people, Abraham and his descendants. Then comes redemption, the epic rescue from slavery in Egypt. And that brings us to the kingdom era.
The settlement of the Promised Land.
Right, which is exactly where Judges sits.
Judges is the critical, fragile bridge between the initial conquest of the land and the eventual establishment of the monarchy with Saul and David.
Okay.
But it serves a very specific diagnostic purpose. It demonstrates the terms of the covenant operating in real time. The people are experiencing the actual lived reality of the blessings of obedience and the curses of disobedience.
Right.
But crucially, the descent we see in Judges anticipates the later catastrophic era of the exile.
How does it anticipate exile? They are living right in the middle of the Promised Land. They haven't been conquered by Babylon yet?
Because exile is not just a geographical location. It is fundamentally a relational state.
Oh, I see.
You can be sitting in the land flowing with milk and honey, but if you are living in total rebellion, engaging in the idolatry of the surrounding nations, you are already living in spiritual exile. You are estranged from the presence of God.
Wow.
The downward spiral we witness in Judges is the internal dry rot that foreshadows their eventual physical removal from the land centuries later. They turned the Promised Land into Babylon long before Babylon ever showed up.
That is a profound way to look at it. So the timeline moves from this internal exile to actual physical exile, then to restoration, the promise of a new covenant.
Yes.
Then the arrival of the Messiah, Jesus. Then the church age, which is where we are living right now. And ultimately, final judgment and the new creation.
Perfect summary.
Yeah.
And within that massive, sweeping flow of history, these flawed judges serve a highly specific theological purpose. They're referred to in the sources as partial redeemers. They're shadows.
I want to pause on that word, shadows. It perfectly captures the tension. Imagine you are in a dimly lit room and you see a jagged, distorted, elongated shadow cast on the wall.
Oh.
The shadow tells you that something or someone is coming. It gives you a vague outline of a figure. But the shadow is warped. It lacks detail. It is entirely incomplete.
Right.
You wouldn't look at the shadow and say, that is the perfect representation of the person. You look at the shadow and it makes you turn your head to look for the actual person walking into the room.
That's a beautiful analogy for how biblical typology works. The incompleteness and even the grotesque flaws of the judges create a burning longing for the reality they are shadowing.
They are entirely inadequate, which forces the audience to look forward.
Look at the contrasts. Where Gideon is paralyzed by hesitation and demands signs, the coming Messiah, Jesus, is completely steadfast, setting his face toward Jerusalem.
Wow. And where Jephthah is tragic, marginalized, and confused, making foolish vows that destroy his family, Jesus is the ultimate outcast who is perfectly wise, perfectly holy, and sacrifices himself to save his family.
Exactly. Where Samson is entirely compromised by his own physical desires, weaponizing his strength for personal revenge.
Right.
Jesus possesses ultimate cosmic power, is tempted in every way, yet remains entirely without sin, and uses his power to absorb the revenge of the world on the cross.
So, to put it incredibly bluntly, Does the Book of Judges essentially act as a massive historical what not to do manual? Like, is its primary function in the timeline to be so thoroughly depressing and chaotic that it forces humanity to realize they need a better solution?
In many ways, yes. The era of the judges is the ultimate diagnosis. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that giving people good laws, giving them prime real estate, and occasionally rescuing them from trouble does not cure the human heart.
Right.
Decentralized autonomy, doing what is right in your own eyes, leads only to chaos and self-destruction.
It's the cycle again.
Right. The cyclical rescues provided by these deeply flawed men could never generate enduring faithfulness in the culture. The diagnosis intensifies the longing for the cure.
They didn't just need a temporary judge.
No, they needed a permanent king, a flawless priest, and a true prophet who could actually transform their nature from the inside out.
Okay, this is a masterful view of history and theology. We've gone from the macro timeline to the micro flaws of these leaders. But as always, we want to bring this right to the front door of the person listening right now.
Yes, let's make it practical.
What does this mean for you, whether you are managing a team at work, navigating a difficult family dynamic, or just trying to figure out your own spiritual life on a Tuesday morning? How do we actually apply the lessons of imperfect leaders to our modern reality?
The application is incredibly practical because, honestly, human nature hasn't changed since the Bronze Age. We still struggle with how to handle flawed leadership.
For sure.
The best way to approach this is to identify the common traps, the myths we tell ourselves when we look at talented but broken people, and dismantle them.
Let's weave through these traps, because I see them everywhere in our culture today. The first major pitfall is looking at someone who is incredibly successful, maybe a CEO whose company is exploding with growth, or a pastor with a massive congregation,
Right.
and assuming, well, God is clearly blessing their work, so God must approve of everything they're doing behind the scenes.
We have to completely decouple use from approval. As we've seen with Samson and Gideon, divine sovereignty is not moral endorsement.
So true.
If you are a leader experiencing a season of massive external success, do not let that success lull you into a false sense of security about your private character. God can use your work to bless others while you are personally walking on incredibly thin ice.
Which leads right into the second trap. If we acknowledge that every leader is deeply flawed, it's really easy to swing to the opposite extreme and become a complete cynic.
Oh, yeah.
You think, well, everyone is messed up. King David was an adulterer. Samson was a disaster. Therefore, character doesn't really matter. We're all just sinners, so who cares?
And that is a fatal misreading of the text. Flaws matter profoundly. Grace covers sin, but grace does not erase the collateral damage of sin.
The consequences.
Think of the devastation caused by Jephthah's vow, or the thousands of people who died because of Samson's lack of self-control. Character defects in leadership create real bleeding wounds in the people they lead. We cannot minimize the destructive fallout of compromise just because God is gracious.
And that destroys the third trap, which is the temptation to hero worship. We love to build statues. We want to read these ancient texts and find moral icons to imitate.
But these judges are deliverers, not moral exemplars. If you read the book of Judges and try to model your conflict resolution after Jephthah or your dating life after Samson, you are going to destroy your life.
Right.
They are warnings, not blueprints.
And if they are warnings, that brings up a huge point about how we select leaders today. There is a trap of thinking, God can use a donkey, God can use a flawed guy hiding in a wine press, so we don't really need leadership standards or training. Just let whoever is passionate take the wheel.
The New Testament fiercely combats that idea. The qualifications for leadership in the early church are almost entirely based on character. Self-control, hospitality, gentleness, marital fidelity, not raw charisma.
Wow, yeah.
The fact that God's grace can operate through brokenness creates the possibility for redemption. It does not negate the absolute necessity for high standards and vigilance in how we appoint leaders.
This highlights two massive errors we see in modern institutions today. We swing wildly like a pendulum between two toxic extremes. On one side, we have the cult of personality.
Yes.
We idolize a charismatic visionary. We treat them as completely untouchable because they're getting phenomenal results. We see the red flags in their character. We hear the whispers of their toxic behavior. But we look the other way because the stock price is up or the auditorium is full.
We enable them right up until the moment they inevitably crash and burn, taking the whole institution down with them.
And then, burned by that crash, we swing to the opposite extreme, total paralysis. A culture of pure cynicism where we demand absolute flawless perfection from anyone who steps into a leadership role.
Right.
If someone has any baggage, any history of failure, or any current struggle, we discard them entirely. We assume God cannot possibly work through anyone who isn't fully mature.
It is the modern tension between untouchable visionary leaders and cancel culture. We either worship the leader as a god or we incinerate them for being human.
So how do we find the middle ground? How do you, in your actual life, acknowledge and bear with human imperfection without normalizing or enabling toxic behavior?
It comes down to establishing what the sources call a trajectory of obedience. True grace acknowledges that we are all starting from a place of brokenness, but it demands dependence, transparency, and quick repentance.
Okay, what does that look like practically?
Practically, this means your workplace, your family, or your community needs to be a space where failure can be confessed openly without the fear of instant annihilation. You have to create psychological and spiritual safety.
But safety isn't an excuse for stagnation.
Exactly. Safety does not mean a lack of standards. Accountability structures must be rigid and maintained. If you are a leader, you do not have to pretend to be a flawless superhero. In fact, pretending is exactly what leads to the performative, hypocritical spirituality that eventually crashes.
Right.
But you also cannot use grace as a shield for spiritual laziness or abuse. You must fear the Lord more than you fear the opinions of your board or your followers. You have to actively welcome correction.
There is a brilliant principle here. Distinguish gifting from character. When you are deciding who to follow, who to hire, or who to trust with your vulnerability, do not just be mesmerized by their resume or their stage presence.
That's huge.
Look at how they treat people who can do nothing for them. Look at how they handle criticism. Ask yourself, not just does this person get results, but does the way this person operates actually honor the Lord?
And for the individual listener who maybe feels too flawed to be used, this history offers a deeply sober hope. God routinely begins with our weakness precisely so that His grace is visible. You do not have to have your entire life perfectly polished for God to include you in His redemptive work. You simply have to be willing, honest about your brokenness, and submitted to His transformation.
That is an incredibly powerful place to land. We have covered massive ground today. We started by diagnosing a culture in freefall, the chaotic, frustrating 7-step cycle of a society stuck in a loop of rebellion, painful oppression, and temporary, localized rescue.
We explored the psychology of spiritual improvisation when people just do what feels right in the moment.
We examined the messy, unvarnished lives of figures like Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson, and we realized that God's temporary empowerment of these individuals for specific tasks did not mean He turned a blind eye to their deep inner disorder.
No, He didn't.
We zoomed out to place this entire era on the grand timeline of redemptive history, seeing how these broken, tragic judges were just jagged shadows. They were a necessary, brutal diagnosis that proved humanity's desperate need for a perfect king.
And ultimately, we realize that the true hero of this ancient, violent story is never the human leader. The hero is the relentless divine mercy that simply refuses to let history self-destruct.
Beautifully said.
God is never embarrassed by our weakness. He is glorified in redeeming it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to really mull over. Think back to that haunting diagnostic phrase. Everyone doing what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
Look closely at the cycles in your own life, your workplace, or your community. Are you constantly looking for a new charismatic leader, a new boss, a new politician, a new influencer to magically break you out of a rut?
Are you hoping a change in external administration will fix everything when what you actually need is a fundamental internal change of heart?
If the patience of God is meant to lead us to repentance and not just give us a comfortable space for complacency.
What is one area of spiritual improvisation in your own life?
Exactly. Where are you just making up the rules as you go to suit your own desires? What is that one thing you need to abandon today? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the things you read, keep learning from the messy reality of history, and most importantly, embrace the grace that meets you right in the middle of your imperfections. We'll catch you next time.